Let us begin at the beginning. Not at the beginning of time itself, but at the beginning of one of the most influential thought experiments ever conceived by the human mind. We are going to explore, slowly and carefully, a story. A story told more than 2,300 years ago in the city of Athens by a philosopher named Plato. Plato lived from approximately 427 to 347 before the Common Era. He was a student of Socrates, that famous questioner who walked the streets of Athens, challenging citizens to examine their beliefs. And Plato in turn became the teacher of Aristotle, who would go on to tutor Alexander the Great. This lineage, this chain of teacher to student, represents one of the most remarkable intellectual inheritances in Western history. But tonight, we are not concerned with the full sweep of Plato's philosophy. We are focused on one image, one extended metaphor, one carefully constructed scene that appears in his work called The Republic. The Republic is a dialogue. In ancient Greek philosophy, a dialogue was a particular form of writing, where ideas were explored through conversation between characters. Usually, Socrates was the main speaker, asking questions, guiding the discussion. In The Republic, Plato uses this format to explore justice, the ideal state, the nature of the soul, and the education of the philosopher-rulers he called the Guardians. The Allegory of the Cave appears in Book 7 of the Republic. By the time we reach this point in the text, Plato has already discussed many things. He has described his vision of an ideal city. He has divided the soul into three parts: reason, spirit, and appetite. He has introduced the concept of the forms, those perfect, eternal, unchanging ideals that exist beyond our physical world. And now, to help explain the relationship between ignorance and knowledge, between the world of appearances and the world of true reality, between the unenlightened person and the philosopher, Plato asks us to imagine a cave. Picture it now, in your mind's eye. Not a small cave, not a simple hollow in a hillside, but a large, deep underground cavern. The kind of cave that extends far back into the earth, where the natural light from the entrance fades into darkness, where the air is cool and still, where sounds echo against stone walls. In this cave, there are prisoners. These are not criminals being punished, not captives of war. They are simply people. People who have been in this cave since childhood. People who have been here so long that they know no other existence. These prisoners are bound. Their legs are chained so they cannot walk away. Their necks are held in place so they cannot turn their heads from side to side. They can only look straight ahead at the wall of the cave in front of them. They have been positioned this way, we are told, since they were young. Behind the prisoners, higher up in the cave, there is a fire. Not the fierce, roaring fire of a blacksmith's forge, but a steady, burning fire that casts light throughout the cavern. The prisoners cannot see this fire directly because they cannot turn around. But they can see its light, reflected and cast upon the wall before them. Between the fire and the prisoners, there is a low wall. Think of it as similar to the partition that puppeteers use to hide themselves from their audience. Along this wall, there is a pathway, and along this pathway, people walk. These people carry various objects: statues of animals, carved figures of humans, vessels and tools, all manner of artificial things. As they walk, these objects they carry rise above the wall, and their shadows are cast by the firelight onto the cave wall that the prisoners face. So what do the prisoners see? They see shadows. Shadows of the objects being carried. Shadows that move across the stone surface in front of them. These shadows are the only visual reality these prisoners have ever known. And what do the prisoners hear? The cave has acoustics. When the people behind the wall speak to one another as they walk with their objects, their voices echo off the cave walls. To the prisoners, facing forward, unable to see the speakers, these echoing voices seem to come from the shadows themselves. Imagine this as your entire world. Since childhood, you have sat in this same spot. You have watched shadows dance across stone. You have heard echoing voices that seem to emanate from those dark shapes. You have never seen a tree, never felt the wind, never looked up at the stars. You have never seen your own hand in clear light. You have never turned your head freely to look at something that caught your attention. The prisoners, Plato tells us, would believe that these shadows are reality itself. They would give names to the different shadow shapes. They would track which shadows appear together, which ones follow which patterns. They would become experts in shadow reality. They would honor the prisoner among them who was best at predicting which shadow would appear next, who could remember the sequences most accurately, who could most quickly name a shadow as it appeared. This is not because the prisoners are foolish. It is simply because this is all they have ever known. How could they believe in anything else? How could they conceive of a reality beyond the shadows, when the shadows are the only reality they have ever experienced? Now, we must understand something important about when and why Plato wrote this. Ancient Athens was a place of intense intellectual ferment. It was a democracy, though not a democracy as we would understand it today. Only free male citizens could participate. Women, slaves, and foreigners could not. But among those who could participate, there was vigorous debate, constant discussion, frequent argument about what was true, what was just, what was good. Athens had been through tremendous upheaval. It had fought the long and devastating Peloponnesian War against Sparta and its allies from 431 to 404 before the Common Era. Athens had ultimately lost. The defeat had been crushing. The democracy had been briefly overthrown by the oligarchy called the 30 Tyrants. Plato's own teacher, Socrates, had been executed by the restored democracy in 399, charged with corrupting the youth and impiety. Plato was disillusioned with Athenian democracy. He believed that the people were easily swayed by persuasive speakers who did not actually possess true knowledge. These speakers, the sophists, taught rhetoric, the art of persuasion. They could argue any side of any question. They could make the weaker argument appear stronger, and the public, as if thinking aloud, Plato believed, could not distinguish between a speaker who truly knew what was right and a speaker who merely sounded convincing. The allegory of the cave emerges from this context. It is Plato's way of illustrating what he saw as the fundamental problem. Most people live in a world of appearances, of opinions, of received wisdom. They do not see true reality. They mistake shadows for substance, and when someone tries to show them the truth, they resist, they reject, they even become hostile. Before we continue deeper into the allegory itself, let us take a moment to understand the physical setting Plato describes more fully. The cave, as a physical space, would have been familiar to ancient Greeks. Greece is a land of limestone mountains, and limestone is a rock that is easily dissolved by water. Over millennia, underground streams and rainwater seeping through cracks create natural caves, some of them quite extensive. The Greeks knew of such caves. Some were used as sanctuaries, places of religious significance. The oracle at Delphi delivered prophecies in a cave-like setting. But Plato's cave is not a natural formation being described for its own sake. It is a carefully constructed metaphor. Every element means something. The cave itself represents the world of physical, sensory experience, the world we perceive with our eyes and ears. The shadows represent the imperfect, fleeting, changing things we encounter in this physical world. The fire represents the sun, but only a false sun, an artificial source of light. The prisoners represent humanity in its ordinary, unenlightened state. We are not being told that we are literally chained in a literal cave. We are being shown that we are metaphorically imprisoned by our limited perspective, by our reliance on sensory experience, by our assumption that what we see is all there is. The objects being carried, the ones whose shadows are cast, these represent the physical objects of our world. But even these objects are not the ultimate reality in Plato's philosophy. They are merely copies, imperfect instances of the true forms. A shadow of a carved statue of a horse is twice removed from the form of horse. First, the statue is a copy of an actual horse, and second, the shadow is a copy of the statue. The people carrying the objects, walking behind the wall, they represent the forces and factors that shape what we see and believe, often without our knowledge. They might represent those in power who control information. They might represent the way our own preconceptions filter and shape our experience. They might represent the arbitrary cultural assumptions we inherit. Plato is asking us to consider a disturbing possibility. What if everything we think we know is merely shadows on a wall? What if there is a truer, clearer, more real world that we have never glimpsed? What if we are not free, but bound? What if we are not seeing reality, but only experiencing a carefully limited illusion? This is an unsettling idea. It challenges our confidence in our own perceptions. It suggests that the world as it appears to us is not the world as it truly is. It implies that most people, most of the time, are fundamentally mistaken about the nature of reality. And yet, Plato is not simply trying to disturb us. He is setting the stage for a journey. Because this allegory is not just about imprisonment. It is also about liberation. It is not just about ignorance. It is also about enlightenment. It is not just about shadows. It is also about seeing the true light. In a few moments, we will follow one of these prisoners as he is freed from his chains, as he is forced to stand, as he is turned around to see the fire, as he is dragged up out of the cave into the bright world above. We will experience his confusion, his pain, his resistance, his gradual adjustment, and finally, his comprehension. But for now, let us simply rest in this image of the cave. The stone walls, smooth and cool to the touch. The dancing shadows, never still, never clear, always changing. The echoing voices, disembodied, seemingly coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. The prisoners, sitting in their long rows, watching, naming, believing. This is where we all start, Plato suggests. This is the human condition. This is the darkness from which we must emerge if we are to see things as they truly are. And with that image held gently in mind, we are ready to continue. The journey upward, liberation and the painful ascent to light. Now, something happens. Something that will change everything for one prisoner. Something that will be simultaneously a liberation and an ordeal. Plato does not tell us who frees this prisoner or why. He does not explain the mechanism of the liberation. He simply says, imagine that one of the prisoners is released from his chains. Picture this moment. For your entire life, you have sat in one position. Your legs have been bound. Your neck has been held in place. Your entire field of vision has been the wall in front of you, with its parade of shadows. And now, suddenly, the chains fall away. The restraint on your neck is removed. You are free to move. What would your first impulse be? Perhaps you would try to stand. Your legs, unused to bearing weight, would tremble. Your muscles, weakened from disuse, would barely support you. Standing after so many years of sitting would be painful. The blood rushing to long compressed limbs would cause a tingling sensation. That feeling of pins and needles we experience when a limb falls asleep from lack of circulation. But this would be that sensation magnified enormously, persisting, making every movement difficult. And what if, in this moment of confusion and discomfort, someone told you to turn around? Plato describes exactly this. The freed prisoner is compelled to turn around. He is forced to look in the direction he has never looked before. What does he see? He sees the fire, that bright, burning fire, higher up in the cave. And remember, this person has never seen direct light before. The brightest thing he has ever experienced is the dim reflection of firelight on stone. Now, he is looking at the source itself. It would be painful, not just uncomfortable, painful. The human eye adjusts to darkness. In the dark, the pupil dilates, expanding to allow in as much light as possible. When suddenly exposed to brightness, the pupil contracts, but not instantly. There is a moment of being overwhelmed, of the retina being flooded with light. It causes physical pain. It causes the eye to water. It causes the instinctive reaction to squint, to turn away, to shield the eyes. Plato tells us that the prisoner would be dazzled. He would be confused. He would be in pain. And what would his natural reaction be? He would want to turn back. He would want to return to the familiar shadows, which never hurt to look at, which made sense to him, which he understood. But in the allegory, the prisoner is not allowed to turn back. Someone, some unspecified liberator, prevents him from returning to his former position. And more than that, this liberator asks him to look at the objects themselves. The carved figures, the statues, the things being carried that cast the shadows. Imagine trying to focus on these objects. Your eyes are in pain from the firelight. Everything is blurry. The objects are three-dimensional, which is a kind of visual information you have never processed before. Your brain has learned to interpret the two-dimensional shadows. It has not learned to interpret the complex shapes and depths of actual objects. If someone pointed to a carved statue of a horse and asked, "What is this?" what would you say? You know the shadow horse. You have watched shadow horses move across the wall for years. You are an expert in shadow horses. But this thing, this solid, detailed, colourful thing that exists in space, is utterly alien to you. Plato tells us that the prisoner would be confused. He might insist that the shadows are more real than these painful, incomprehensible objects. He might say that the shadows are clearer, easier to see, more understandable. He would not immediately accept that these objects are the source of the shadows, or that they are more real than the shadows. This is crucial to understand. The prisoner is not enlightened instantly. Knowledge does not come in a flash of insight. Instead, there is resistance, confusion, and pain. The familiar seems more true than the unfamiliar, even when we are confronted with evidence that our familiar understanding is incomplete. But the ordeal is not over. In fact, it has barely begun, because the liberator in Plato's Allegory now does something even more dramatic. He drags the prisoner up, out of the cave. The word Plato uses, in the original ancient Greek, suggests force and difficulty. This is not a gentle guidance. This is a forcible removal. The prisoner is dragged up a steep and rugged path. He resists. He does not want to go, but he is compelled forward, away from everything he has known, towards something completely unknown. The journey upward would be arduous. Imagine climbing from deep underground toward the surface. The path is steep. It is rough. There are rocks to stumble over. The prisoner's legs, we remember, are weak and unsteady. Each step is an effort. Each meter climbed leaves him more exhausted. And as he climbs, the light grows brighter. The fire, which was so painful to look at, is left behind. But ahead, above, there is a different light, a stronger light, a light that is not orange and flickering, but bright and steady. It is daylight, natural light, sunlight. Let us think about what sunlight would mean to someone who has never experienced it. The sun is approximately 1 million times brighter than the full moon. It is far, far brighter than any fire. If the fire in the cave caused pain and dazzling confusion, what would the direct light of the sun do? Plato tells us that when the prisoner finally emerges from the cave into the world above, he would be unable to see anything at all. His eyes, adjusted to the near darkness of the cave, then partially adjusted to the firelight, would be completely overwhelmed by the brightness of day. He would be, effectively, blinded by the light. This is another moment of profound discomfort and disorientation. The prisoner has been dragged away from his home, forced to endure pain and confusion, compelled to climb a difficult path, and now, having reached what should be a moment of revelation, he cannot see anything. He can only perceive a painful, white brilliance that makes it impossible to open his eyes for more than a moment at a time. What would the prisoner's emotional state be at this point? He would likely be angry. He would feel that he had been subjected to suffering for no reason. He would be convinced that the cave, with its familiar shadows, was better than this painful blindness. He would want to return. He would beg to go back. But in the allegory, he is not permitted to return. And gradually, very gradually, something begins to change. First, the prisoner would begin to adjust to the light. The process of light adaptation in the human eye takes time. In darkness, the photoreceptor cells in the retina become more sensitive. In brightness, they become less sensitive, but more able to process detailed information. This adjustment happens over minutes and hours, not instantly. Plato describes the stages carefully. At first, the prisoner would find it easier to look at shadows and reflections. He might look at the shadows of trees and people cast on the ground by the sun. These would be somewhat familiar. They are shadows after all, though brighter and sharper and more detailed than the cave shadows. Or he might look at reflections in water. the image of the world mirrored on the surface of a pool or stream. These reflections would be dimmer than the actual objects, and therefore easier for his adjusting eyes to perceive. Gradually, as his eyes continued to adapt, he would be able to look at the things themselves. He would see trees, real trees, with rough bark and green leaves that move in the breeze. He would see animals, not shadow animals or carved statue animals, but living creatures that breathe and move and make sounds. He would see other people, their faces, their expressions, their gestures. Each new thing he saw would be a revelation. Colors, which do not exist in the shadow world, would be everywhere. The sky would be blue, the grass would be green, flowers would be red and yellow and purple. The sheer variety and vividness of the world would be overwhelming in a completely different way than the pain of brightness. It would be overwhelming in its richness, its detail, its beauty. And then, Plato tells us, the prisoner would finally be able to look at the sun itself. Not directly, perhaps, which, even for eyes adjusted to daylight, can be harmful, but he would be able to perceive it, to understand that this is the source of all the light and warmth and life in the world above. The sun makes it possible to see. The sun makes plants grow. The sun marks the passage of time with its daily movement across the sky and its seasonal path through the constellations. The prisoner would come to understand that the sun in the world above holds the same position that the fire held in the cave. But the sun is true and natural, while the fire was artificial and false. The sun is the source of reality and visibility. Without the sun, nothing in the upper world could be seen or could exist. And more than that, as if thinking aloud, the prisoner would come to understand the relationship between the two worlds. He would realize that the cave world was a limited, distorted, impoverished version of this world. The shadows were copies of copies. The objects were artificial. The fire was a poor substitute for the sun. Everything he had believed to be reality was actually a diminished reflection of true reality. This moment of understanding, Plato suggests, would be a moment of enlightenment in the deepest sense. The prisoner would finally see things as they truly are. He would have knowledge, not just opinion. He would perceive reality, not just appearance. But Plato adds another detail here, one that is often overlooked. He says that when the prisoner thinks back to his former life in the cave, to the shadows and the competitions to predict which shadow would appear next, and the honors given to those who were best at shadow recognition, he would not wish to return to those concerns. He would pity the other prisoners, still trapped in their limited understanding. He would feel fortunate to have escaped, despite all the pain of the journey. And if he thought about going back to the cave, to compete again in the shadow naming contests, he would find the idea absurd. How could he take such things seriously, now that he had seen the real world? How could he care about being honored for correctly predicting the sequence of shadows, when he knew that the shadows were merely dim copies of artificial objects, themselves lit by a fire that was a poor copy of the sun? This is a key psychological moment in the allegory. The freed prisoner has been transformed. His values have changed. What he cares about has changed. What he considers important has changed. He has gained a new perspective, and from that perspective, his former life seems small, insignificant. But we must pause here and ask a question. Is this liberation entirely positive? The prisoner has gained true knowledge, yes. He has seen reality, yes. But he has also lost something. He has lost the comfort of certainty within his former world. He has lost his place in the social structure of the cave. He has lost the ability to find meaning and satisfaction in the activities that his fellow prisoners value. He has become, in a sense, alienated. He can no longer fully participate in the world of the cave because he knows it is false. But the other prisoners do not know it is false. They still live in the shadow world. They still take it seriously. They still find meaning there. And this leads us to the next part of the allegory, which is in many ways the most troubling. Because Plato does not end the story with the freed prisoner living happily in the world above, content with his knowledge. Instead, as if thinking aloud, Plato asks us to imagine what would happen if the freed prisoner returned to the cave. But before we explore that return, let us take a moment to consider what this journey upward represents in Plato's broader philosophy. The cave represents the world of physical things, the world we perceive with our senses. The world above represents the world of forms, the eternal, perfect, unchanging realities that exist beyond the physical. The sun represents the form of the good, which Plato considered the highest of all forms, the source of truth and being. In Plato's epistemology, his theory of knowledge, there are different levels of understanding. At the lowest level is imagination or conjecture, where we perceive only images and reflections. Next is belief, where we perceive physical objects but do not understand their true nature. Above that is thought or reasoning, where we use logic and mathematics to understand abstract relationships. And at the highest level is pure knowledge or understanding, where we directly grasp the forms themselves. The prisoner's journey from the shadows to the sun represents the soul's ascent through these levels of knowledge. The shadows are imagination. The objects in the cave are belief. The world above, seen gradually, represents thought. And the sun itself represents pure knowledge of the good. But this is not just an epistemological allegory. It is also a political one. Remember that this allegory appears in The Republic, Plato's work on the ideal state. The freed prisoner represents the philosopher who has been educated in truth and has seen the forms. The other prisoners represent the ordinary citizens who live in the world of opinion and appearance. And Plato's point, which will become clearer when we examine the return to the cave, is that the philosopher has an obligation to return to the ordinary world, to try to lead and educate others, even though this will be difficult and thankless. So the journey upward is not just a personal journey of enlightenment. It is also a preparation for leadership, for teaching, for attempting to bring others toward truth. The pain and difficulty of the ascent are necessary because they transform the prisoner into someone who has genuine knowledge, not just opinion, and who therefore has the right and the duty to guide others. Let us hold these ideas gently as we continue. The freed prisoner standing in the sunlight, looking back at the dark cave entrance, knowing what he now knows, remembering the world he left behind. He has been liberated. He has been enlightened. He has seen the truth. And now he must decide whether to return to the darkness. The world above, reality, the sun, and true knowledge. We have climbed with the prisoner from the depths of the cave into the light of day. Now, let us linger here in this world above. Let us examine it more carefully, understand it more fully, and explore what Plato means by this realm of true reality. Because the world above is not simply the outside in a physical sense, it is, for Plato, the realm of the forms, the eternal, perfect, unchanging realities that are the true objects of knowledge. To understand what Plato means by forms, we must first understand the problem he was trying to solve. Ancient Greek philosophers before Plato had struggled with a fundamental question: what is real? Is reality the constantly changing world we perceive with our senses? Or is reality something stable and eternal that exists beyond sensory perception? Heraclitus, a philosopher who lived about a century before Plato, had argued that everything is in flux. You cannot step in the same river twice, he said, because the river is constantly flowing, constantly changing. The water you step in the second time is not the same water you stepped in the first time. And not only the river, but everything is always changing. Nothing remains the same from one moment to the next. But if everything is constantly changing, how can we have knowledge? Knowledge requires something stable to know. If everything is always different, then what we learned a moment ago is already outdated. We cannot truly know anything, only have fleeting opinions about the way things appear to be in this instant. Parmenides, another pre-Socratic philosopher, took the opposite view. He argued that change is impossible. True reality, true being, must be eternal and unchanging. What appears to change is mere illusion. Our senses deceive us into thinking things change, but reason tells us that true being cannot change, because change would mean something that is becomes something that is not, which is a logical impossibility. But Parmenides' view also has problems. If all change is illusion, then the entire world of our experience is illusion. We are left with a conception of reality that has no connection to our lived experience. Plato sought a middle way. He agreed with Heraclitus that the physical world is constantly changing. A tree grows, flourishes, and decays. A human is born, ages, and dies. Even rocks, over sufficient time, erode and crumble. In the physical world, nothing is permanent. But Plato also agreed with Parmenides that true knowledge requires something eternal and unchanging. His solution was to propose two levels of reality. The physical world, the world of sensory experience, is real in a sense, but it is a diminished, imperfect reality. Above and beyond it is the world of forms, which is fully real, eternal, and unchanging. What is a form? A form is the perfect, ideal, essential nature of something. Consider the form of circle. In the physical world, we can draw circles or find circular objects, a ring, a wheel, a coin. These are all approximately circular, but none of them is perfectly circular. If you examine them closely enough, you will find irregularities, deviations from true circularity. Yet we can understand what a perfect circle is. We can define it mathematically, the set of all points in a plane that are equidistant from a center point. This definition describes something that no physical circle perfectly embodies, but that all physical circles approximate. This perfect circle, this ideal of circularity, is the form of circle. The form of circle exists eternally. It never changes. It is not in any physical location. It is not made of any physical material. It is not perceived with the senses. Yet it is, in Plato's view, more real than any physical circle, because the physical circles exist only by participating in or imitating the form. Now extend this concept beyond geometry. There is a form of tree. No physical tree is the perfect tree. Every physical tree is a particular tree with a particular shape, a particular size, growing in a particular place. Some trees are damaged by storms, some are diseased, some are stunted by poor soil, but all trees participate in the form of tree, which is the eternal, perfect unchanging essence of what it is to be a tree. There is a form of horse. Every physical horse is born, lives, and dies. Every physical horse is unique, but all horses share in the form of horse, which is eternal and perfect. And crucially for ethics, there are forms of values. There is a form of justice. The just actions we observe in the physical world are just because they participate in this form. There is a form of beauty. Beautiful things are beautiful because they participate in beauty itself.
There is a form of courage, of temperance, of wisdom. And above all forms, at the pinnacle of this eternal realm, is the form of the good. This is the highest form, the source of truth and being for all other forms. Just as the sun, in the physical world, is the source of light and life, the form of the good, in the realm of forms, is the source of reality and knowability. This is what the world above represents in the allegory of the cave. When the prisoner emerges into the sunlight and gradually learns to perceive the things around him, culminating in being able to perceive the sun itself, he is representing the soul's journey to knowledge of the forms, culminating in knowledge of the good. Let us think more carefully about this journey and what each stage represents. When the prisoner first emerges, he can only look at shadows and reflections. In the metaphor, this represents the lowest level of understanding in the upper world. Even in the realm of forms, there are levels. The shadows and reflections might represent our initial, confused attempts to understand abstract concepts, when we have left behind simple sense perception, but have not yet grasped the forms clearly. Then the prisoner can look at the things themselves, the actual trees, animals, and people in the world above. These represent the forms. But notice something important here. In the physical world, trees and animals and people are constantly changing, physical things. But in the metaphor, the things the prisoner sees in the world above are stable and permanent. They are there to be studied and understood. They are not shadowy and fleeting like the cave shadows. This is because in the allegory, these visible things in the world above are standing in for the invisible forms. Plato is using physical vision and visible objects as a metaphor for intellectual understanding and abstract realities. When he speaks of seeing the forms, he does not mean seeing with the eyes. He means comprehending with the mind. The ancient Greeks had a word for this kind of intellectual seeing, noesis. It means understanding, comprehension, direct intellectual apprehension. It is contrasted with doxa, which means opinion or belief based on sensory experience. The journey from the cave to the sunlight is the journey from doxa to noesis, from opinion to knowledge. And finally, the prisoner can look at the sun. The sun, in this allegory, represents the form of the good. Just as the sun makes it possible to see all visible things, the good makes it possible to know all knowable things. The good is the source of truth and being. It is what makes the forms intelligible and what makes the soul capable of knowing them. What is the form of the good? This is one of the most difficult questions in Plato's philosophy, and Plato himself never gives a direct, simple answer. In The Republic, Socrates explicitly says that he cannot explain the good itself, only give analogies. The sun being one of those analogies. But we can say some things. The good is not just moral goodness, though it includes that. It is the principle of perfection, of fulfillment, of proper functioning. A good knife is one that cuts well. A good horse is one that is strong, fast, and healthy. The good itself is the principle by which anything is good in its particular way. More than that, the good is the principle of reality and knowability. For something to be fully real, in Plato's philosophy, it must be good. The forms are real because they are perfect, because they are as they ought to be. The physical world is less real because it is imperfect, because things in it fail to fully be what they ought to be. And the good is the goal of all rational desire. When we desire knowledge, we desire to know what is true, and truth is oriented toward the good. When we desire to act rightly, we desire to do what is good. When we desire to create something beautiful, we desire to instantiate beauty, which is a form that participates in the good. So when the prisoner, after long adjustment and effort, is finally able to look toward the sun and understand that it is the source of everything visible, this represents the philosopher's achievement of understanding the good. This is the highest form of knowledge. This is what makes someone truly wise. But let us think about what this means for how we should live. If the physical world is only a shadow of reality, does that mean we should ignore it? If true reality is the eternal forms, does that mean the changing physical world doesn't matter? Plato does not say that the physical world should be ignored. Rather, he says it should be understood in the right way. Physical things matter because they participate in forms. A just action matters because it participates in justice. A beautiful painting matters because it participates in beauty. But we should not mistake the physical instance for the eternal form. And more importantly, understanding the forms should guide how we interact with the physical world. If we understand justice itself, we will be better able to act justly in particular situations. If we understand beauty itself, we will be better able to create beautiful things and recognize beauty in the world around us. This is why Plato believed that philosophers should be rulers, or rulers should be philosophers. Only those who have seen the forms, who have knowledge of the good, can truly know how to govern justly. Those who live only in the world of appearances, who have only opinions based on sensory experience, will make decisions based on what seems good, rather than what truly is good. The world above, in the Allegory, is also a world of freedom. The prisoner, once freed from his chains and ascended to the surface, is no longer bound. He can move freely. He can turn his head in any direction. He can walk where he wishes. This freedom represents intellectual freedom, the freedom of a mind that is no longer trapped by false assumptions, no longer bound by unexamined beliefs, no longer limited to second-hand opinions. But this freedom comes with responsibility, and this brings us to a crucial turn in the allegory. The freed prisoner, standing in the sunlight, having achieved knowledge of reality and understanding of the good, faces a choice. Or perhaps not a choice, but a duty, because Plato does not end the allegory here. He does not say that the freed prisoner simply stays in the world above, enjoying his knowledge and his freedom. Instead, Plato asks us to imagine what would happen if this freed prisoner returned to the cave. Why would he return? If he has escaped ignorance and suffering, if he has achieved knowledge and enlightenment, if he has seen reality and understood the good, why would he go back to the darkness? Plato suggests that the freed prisoner would have two reasons. First, gratitude and justice. If someone freed him and guided him to the light, he has an obligation to do the same for others. Second, and more importantly, the welfare of others demands it. The prisoners in the cave are in a state of ignorance and bondage. They do not know that they are ignorant. They believe the shadows are reality. Someone who knows the truth has a responsibility to try to enlighten them, even if it is difficult. even if it is dangerous. This is a profound ethical claim. Plato is saying that knowledge brings obligation. The philosopher, having achieved understanding of the good, cannot simply withdraw from society to contemplate truth. The philosopher must return to the cave of ordinary human society, must re-engage with the world of changing appearances and imperfect approximations, must try to guide others toward truth and justice. And this is where the allegory becomes darkest, because Plato does not imagine that the philosopher's return will be welcomed. He does not imagine that the other prisoners will gratefully accept the freed prisoner's testimony. Instead, as we will see in the next section, Plato imagines resistance, mockery, and even violence. But before we descend back into the cave, let us take one more moment here in the light. Let us appreciate what Plato is showing us. A vision of reality as layered, with the physical world we perceive being only the surface, and a deeper, truer, eternal reality existing beyond our senses. A vision of knowledge as possible, but difficult, requiring effort, pain, and transformation. A vision of the human condition as one of potential ascent, from ignorance to understanding, from bondage to freedom, from darkness to light. Whether or not we accept Plato's metaphysics, whether or not we believe in the literal existence of his forms, there is something compelling about this vision. The idea that there is more to reality than what we immediately perceive. The idea that understanding requires effort and transformation. The idea that we can transcend our initial limitations and achieve genuine knowledge. Many centuries after Plato, other thinkers would take up and transform these ideas. Medieval Christian philosophers would identify Plato's forms with ideas in the mind of God. Kant would argue that the mind itself structures experience according to innate categories, making knowledge possible. Modern scientists would seek the mathematical laws underlying physical phenomena, echoing Plato's belief that the true nature of reality is abstract and eternal, not material and changing. But we are not yet finished with the allegory. The freed prisoner must now turn away from the sun, turn away from the world of light and knowledge, and descend back into the cave. Back to the shadows, back to the chains, back to the darkness he has escaped. And when he returns, he will face the greatest challenge of all. Not the physical challenge of climbing out of the cave, not the perceptual challenge of adjusting to the light, but the social and political challenge of trying to convince the prisoners that they are prisoners, that the shadows are not reality, that there is a world beyond the cave they have never seen. And so, we must follow him back down. The return to darkness, the philosopher's burden and rejection. Now comes the descent. The freed prisoner, having seen the true world, having basked in the sunlight, having understood the forms and glimpsed the good itself, must turn his back on all of this and return to the cave. Return to the place he has escaped. Return to the darkness he has transcended. Return to the prisoners who do not yet know they are prisoners. Plato asks us to imagine this return in detail, and the first thing he asks us to consider is what happens to the freed prisoner's eyes. Remember, when the prisoner first emerged from the cave into the sunlight, he was blinded by the brightness. His eyes, adjusted to darkness, could not process the intensity of daylight. It took time, gradual, patient time, for his eyes to adjust. First, seeing shadows and reflections, then objects, then finally, the sun itself. Now, the process must happen in reverse. The freed prisoner descends the steep, rugged path back down into the cave. As he descends, the sunlight fades. The entrance to the cave becomes a dimming point behind him. The darkness of the cave, that darkness he had grown so accustomed to for so many years, that darkness he had learned to see beyond, now surrounds him again. But his eyes are no longer adjusted to this darkness. They are adjusted to daylight. In the darkness of the cave, he is effectively blind. He stumbles. He cannot see the path. He cannot make out the shapes around him. The prisoners, sitting in their rows watching the shadows on the wall, are barely visible to him. Where once he could name the shadows quickly and accurately, now he cannot see them clearly at all. The firelight, which had seemed so bright and painful when he first turned to look at it during his liberation, now seems dim and inadequate. The shadows it casts, which he once believed were reality itself, now seem even more faint and unclear. If the other prisoners noticed his return, if they saw him stumbling in the darkness, unable to see the shadows clearly, unable to participate in their activities, what would they think? They would think that he had been harmed. They would think that his journey up out of the cave had damaged him, blinded him, made him worse off than he was before. And if he tried to explain where he had been, if he tried to tell them about the world above, about the trees and the animals, and the people and the sun, about the true reality that exists beyond the shadows, what would they think then? Plato tells us clearly, they would not believe him. They would think he was speaking nonsense. They would think he had gone mad. They would mock him. Why would they not believe him? Because nothing in their experience corresponds to what he describes. They have never seen the world above. They have never seen true sunlight. They have no concept of what he is talking about. His descriptions sound like fantasies, like the ravings of someone whose mind has been damaged by his experiences. Moreover, his claims challenge the very foundation of their reality. They have spent their entire lives watching the shadows, learning the patterns of the shadows, building their understanding of reality based on the shadows. They have competitions about who can best predict which shadow will appear next. They honor and respect those who are most skilled at shadow recognition. And now this returned prisoner is telling them that it is all meaningless, that the shadows are not reality, that they are all mistaken about the fundamental nature of their world, that there is something vastly more real and important that they have never seen and cannot imagine. This is not just an intellectual disagreement. This is an attack on their entire worldview, their entire value system, their entire way of life. It is deeply threatening. It is deeply disturbing. And so they resist. They reject the message, and they reject the messenger. Plato suggests that they would ridicule the returned prisoner. They would say that his journey up out of the cave had ruined his eyes, and that it is not worth going up. They would say that anyone who tried to free them and lead them up would be better killed than allowed to destroy their vision, as the returned prisoner's vision had been destroyed. Let us pause here, as if thinking aloud, and consider the darkness of this claim. Plato is suggesting that if someone tried to free the prisoners and lead them toward enlightenment, the prisoners would resist violently. They would prefer to kill the liberator rather than accept the possibility that their understanding of reality is wrong. Why would Plato include this violent rejection in the allegory? Because he had witnessed it. His teacher, Socrates, had devoted his life to questioning the assumptions of his fellow Athenians, to challenging their unexamined beliefs, to trying to lead them toward genuine knowledge and virtue. And Athens had responded by putting Socrates on trial and executing him. The execution of Socrates was the defining event of Plato's life. Socrates had been charged with corrupting the youth of Athens and with impiety toward the gods. The real reason, most historians believe, was that Socrates had embarrassed powerful people by exposing the shallowness of their knowledge. He had questioned cherished beliefs. He had made people uncomfortable by insisting that they examine their assumptions. In 439 before the Common Era, a jury of Athenian citizens found Socrates guilty and sentenced him to death by drinking hemlock,
a poison. Socrates, refusing to flee or compromise his principles, accepted the sentence and drank the poison, dying while discussing philosophy with his students. For Plato, this was the clearest possible illustration of how society treats the philosopher. The philosopher, like the freed prisoner, has seen beyond the cave of conventional opinion. The philosopher tries to lead others toward truth, and society, as if thinking aloud, feeling threatened by this challenge to its cherished illusions, responds with hostility and violence. So the allegory of the cave is not just an abstract epistemological metaphor. It is also a deeply personal, political, and social commentary. It is Plato's way of explaining why his beloved teacher was killed, and why philosophers will always be misunderstood and mistreated by the societies they try to help. But let us think more deeply about the nature of this resistance. Why, fundamentally, do the prisoners reject the freed prisoner's testimony? Is it simply stubbornness? Is it simply fear of change? There is something deeper at work. The prisoner's entire identity is bound up with their cave reality. They are experts at recognizing shadows. They are honored and respected for this expertise. Their social standing, their sense of competence, their understanding of what matters. All of this is built on the foundation of shadow reality. If they accept that the shadows are not reality, they must accept that their expertise is worthless. They must accept that the honors they have received are meaningless. They must accept that they have wasted their lives perfecting a skill that has no real value. This is an enormous psychological cost. And beyond that, accepting the freed prisoner's testimony would require them to undertake the same painful journey he undertook. They would have to be freed from their chains, which would be physically painful. They would have to turn and look at the fire, which would hurt their eyes. They would have to climb the steep path, which would exhaust them. They would have to endure the blindness of emerging into sunlight. They would have to spend long hours adjusting and learning to see a completely new world. All of this effort, all of this pain, and for what? For a world they cannot imagine, described by someone they now see as damaged and deluded. From their perspective, it makes no sense. It seems like madness to abandon the familiar, comprehensible world of the cave for the incomprehensible promises of the returned prisoner. And yet, Plato insists that the freed prisoner must try. The philosopher must return to the cave. The one who has achieved knowledge must attempt to enlighten those who remain in ignorance. This is not optional. It is a duty. In the Republic, this duty is central to Plato's political philosophy. He proposes that the ideal state should be ruled by philosopher kings, individuals who have been educated in philosophy, who have come to understand the forms, who have achieved knowledge of the good. These philosopher rulers do not want to rule, Plato says. They would prefer to remain in contemplation of truth, but they must rule, because only they have genuine knowledge of what is truly good, and therefore only they can govern justly. The freed prisoner returning to the cave represents the philosopher king returning to the messy, complicated, frustrating world of politics and human affairs. It would be more pleasant to remain in the world of philosophical contemplation. But justice demands that those with knowledge use that knowledge for the benefit of others. This creates a profound tension. The philosopher has transcended the concerns of ordinary life. The philosopher knows that the political debates and social competitions of the cave are based on illusions. The philosopher would be justified, in a sense, in simply staying away, in refusing to participate in such meaningless activities. But the philosopher is also the only one who can improve things. The other prisoners, still trapped in their illusions, cannot govern justly because they do not know what justice truly is. They have opinions about justice, based on their limited experience of shadow reality. But the philosopher has knowledge of justice itself, the form of justice, and therefore can guide the society toward what is truly just. So the philosopher must return, must re-enter the cave, must adjust once again to seeing shadows, must attempt to communicate truths that the prisoners are not prepared to hear, must endure misunderstanding, mockery, and potentially violence. This is the philosopher's burden: to know the truth and to be unable to effectively communicate it, to see the problems clearly and to be unable to easily fix them, to understand what is good and to watch others pursue what is merely apparently good, to have escaped the cave and to be compelled by duty and compassion to return to it. There is something tragic in this vision. The philosopher is depicted not as triumphant, but as burdened. Enlightenment does not bring unalloyed happiness. It brings responsibility, difficulty, and alienation. And yet, Plato insists that this is the right way to live, that knowledge is worth pursuing, even though it brings these burdens, that attempting to enlighten others is worth doing, even though it will often fail, that the philosopher's life, despite its difficulties, is better than the unexamined life of the prisoners. Let us consider what this means for us, as individuals living our lives. We may not be philosophers in Plato's sense. We may not have achieved knowledge of the forms, but we all have experiences of learning something true that others do not yet understand, and trying to share that understanding. Perhaps you have studied a subject deeply and come to understand its complexities, only to find that others prefer simple, incorrect explanations. Perhaps you have traveled to a different culture and gained new perspectives, only to find that people at home are not interested in hearing about it. Perhaps you have had a profound personal experience that changed your understanding, only to find that you cannot adequately explain it to others who have not had similar experiences. In these situations, you are like the returned prisoner. You have seen something others have not seen. You have a wider perspective, and it can be frustrating, isolating, even painful to be unable to share that perspective or to have it rejected when you try. The allegory of the cave tells us that this is a normal part of the human condition. Those who learn and grow will inevitably move beyond some of their peers. They will see things others do not see. They will understand things others do not understand. And they will face the choice: withdraw into their own understanding or try to help others see what they have seen, knowing that the effort may be thankless or even dangerous. Plato clearly thinks we should choose the latter. We should try to help. We should try to enlighten. We should try to free others from whatever chains bind them to limited understanding. Not because it will be easy or pleasant, but because it is right. And yet, we must also recognize the limits of what we can do. The prisoners in the cave must, ultimately, make their own journey. They cannot be simply told about the world above and instantly understand. They must experience the liberation, the turning around, the painful adjustment to the firelight, the difficult climb, the blinding daylight, the gradual adaptation, the slow learning to see clearly. No one can do this for them. The freed prisoner can describe where he has been and what he has seen. He can urge them to make the journey. He can even physically begin the process of freeing them from their chains. But each prisoner must do the difficult work of ascending and learning for themselves. This is true of all education, all enlightenment, all growth. It cannot be passively received. It must be actively undertaken. The teacher can point the way,
but the student must walk the path. And so the returned prisoner stands in the cave, his eyes slowly adjusting once again to the darkness, looking at the other prisoners who do not yet know they are prisoners, at the shadows that they believe are reality, at the familiar scene that now appears so different to him, because he knows what lies beyond it. He knows that most of them will not believe him. He knows that some will mock him. He knows that a few might even try to harm him. But he also knows that perhaps one or two might listen, might be curious, might be willing to be freed from their chains and begin the difficult ascent. And for those one or two, the effort is worth it. For the sake of even a few who might be brought from ignorance to knowledge, from bondage to freedom, from darkness to light, the philosopher must make the attempt. This is the heart of the allegory's political message. It is not optimistic. It does not suggest that most people will readily embrace truth and enlightenment. It acknowledges that most will resist, that change is difficult, that vested interests in the status quo are strong. But it insists that the attempt must be made anyway, that those who have knowledge have a responsibility to share it, even when that sharing is difficult or dangerous. That the philosopher cannot abandon the cave, but must return to it again and again, generation after generation, trying to lead at least some prisoners toward the light. And with this understanding of the philosopher's burden, of the resistance that truth-tellers face, of the courage required to challenge cherished illusions, we can begin to see the full depth and complexity of Plato's vision. This is not a simple story about knowledge and ignorance. It is a profound meditation on the human condition, on the difficulty of wisdom, on the cost of enlightenment, and on the obligations that knowledge brings. And so, we prepare to emerge from the allegory itself and consider its deeper meanings, its broader implications, and the questions it still asks us today, more than 2,000 years after it was first imagined. The deeper meanings, epistemology, politics, and the enduring questions. We have journeyed through the allegory. We have sat with the prisoners in the darkness. We have climbed with the freed prisoner into the light. We have returned with him to the cave to face rejection and misunderstanding. Now, let us step back and consider the allegory as a whole. Let us explore its layers of meaning, its philosophical implications, and its enduring relevance. First, let us consider the epistemological dimension. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy concerned with knowledge, what it is, how we acquire it, what distinguishes knowledge from mere belief or opinion. The allegory of the cave is, at its core, an epistemological teaching. Plato is presenting a theory of knowledge with distinct levels. At the bottom is imagination or conjecture, the prisoners seeing shadows and thinking they are seeing reality. Next is belief, the prisoners seeing the actual objects that cast the shadows and the fire that lights them. This is better than seeing only shadows, but still not true knowledge, because these objects are artificial, made by humans, lit by an artificial fire. Above belief is reasoning or thought, the freed prisoner in the world above, learning to understand what he sees, recognizing patterns and relationships, beginning to comprehend the nature of reality. And at the top is pure knowledge or understanding, the freed prisoner finally able to look toward the sun
and understand it as the source of all light and life, as the principle that makes everything else visible and knowable. This hierarchy of knowledge corresponds to Plato's metaphysical hierarchy of reality. The shadows are the least real. The artificial objects are more real than shadows. The natural world above is more real than the artificial objects, and the sun, representing the form of the good, is the most real thing of all, the source and ground of all other reality. One of the key insights here is that knowledge is not simply a matter of collecting more information. The prisoners in the cave have lots of information. They know which shadows appear when, which sequences are common, which patterns repeat. They have a detailed and complex understanding of their shadow world. But this detailed understanding is still not knowledge, because it is based on a fundamentally wrong conception of what is real. They have mistaken appearance for reality, images for things, copies for originals. No amount of additional shadow observation will correct this fundamental error. What is needed is not more information, but a transformation of perspective, a complete reorientation of understanding. This is why the journey out of the cave is so difficult and painful. It is not just learning new facts. It is unlearning a whole way of seeing the world. It is recognizing that what you thought you knew was wrong. It is rebuilding your understanding from the ground up, based on a new and truer foundation. In modern terms, we might say that Plato is describing something like a paradigm shift. The freed prisoner is moving from one framework of understanding to a completely different framework. Within the old framework, he was knowledgeable and competent. But the old framework itself was flawed. Moving to the new framework renders all his old knowledge obsolete and requires him to start over as a beginner. This has implications for education. Plato is suggesting that true education is not about filling students' minds with facts and techniques. True education is about turning the soul around, redirecting its attention from the shadows of appearance to the light of truth. It is about developing the capacity to think clearly and reason soundly, not just memorizing information. In the Republic, Plato outlines an educational program for the philosopher rulers. It begins with music and poetry in childhood, to shape the emotions and instill proper values. It continues with mathematics and geometry in adolescence, to train the mind in abstract reasoning. It culminates with dialectic in adulthood, which is the practice of philosophical discussion aimed at understanding the forms themselves. The allegory of the cave illustrates why this long, careful education is necessary. You cannot simply tell someone the truth and expect them to understand. Their mind must be prepared. They must develop the capacity to grasp abstract realities. They must learn to look beyond immediate appearances. They must become capable of withstanding the disorientation and discomfort of having their assumptions challenged. Now let us turn to the political dimension of the allegory. We have already discussed how the freed prisoner represents the philosopher king, who must return to the cave of politics, despite preferring to remain in philosophical contemplation. But there is more to say about the political implications of this allegory. Plato wrote The Republic, response to political crisis. Athens had lost the Peloponnesian War. The democracy had proven unstable, swinging between mob rule and oligarchy. The city had executed Socrates, the wisest man Plato knew. Plato was convinced that democracy, as practiced in Athens, was fundamentally flawed. Why was it flawed? Because, Plato argued, the people did not have knowledge. They had opinions, and opinions, no matter how strongly held, are not sufficient for good governance. The people could be swayed by skilled speakers who appealed to their prejudices and desires. The people could not distinguish between a just policy and a policy that merely appeared just.
The people, in effect, were still in the cave, watching shadows and mistaking them for reality. The allegory of the cave is Plato's explanation of this problem. The prisoners represent the citizens of a democracy. They are not evil or stupid. They are simply ignorant. They have not been educated. They have not learned to think clearly about justice and the good. They make decisions based on appearance, on rhetoric, on emotion, rather than on true knowledge. And who are the people walking behind the wall, carrying the objects whose shadows are cast? They are the politicians, the sophists, the rhetoricians, those who shape public opinion without themselves possessing true knowledge. They manipulate the shadows. They control what the prisoners see. They shape the reality that the prisoners experience. But these shadow makers are also prisoners in their own way. They may have more power than the ordinary prisoners. They may understand that they are manipulating perceptions. But they too are in the cave. They too do not see true reality. They too are ignorant of the forms and the good. Their manipulation is based on opinion and conventional wisdom, not on genuine knowledge. Only the philosopher, who has escaped the cave and seen the forms, has genuine knowledge. Only the philosopher knows what justice truly is, what the good truly is, what the ideal city would truly look like. Therefore, Plato argues, only the philosopher is qualified to rule. But here we encounter a problem, one that Plato acknowledges. The philosopher does not want to rule. The philosopher has seen the truth. The philosopher would prefer to spend time in contemplation of the forms, in pursuit of wisdom, in the calm and clarity of intellectual understanding. Why would the philosopher want to descend back into the messy, frustrating, contentious world of politics? Plato's answer is duty. The philosopher must rule because it is just. The philosopher has received an education, funded by the city, that has enabled him to escape the cave. The philosopher owes a debt to the community. And more than that, the philosopher knows that if philosophers do not rule, others will. Others who do not have knowledge, who will make decisions based on ignorance, who will harm the city even if they mean well. So the philosopher accepts the burden of rule, not out of desire for power, but out of obligation to justice. And this, Plato suggests, is what makes the philosopher king different from ordinary rulers. Ordinary rulers seek power for its own sake, or for the benefits it brings them. The philosopher king rules reluctantly, accepting it as a duty, and would gladly give it up if there were others more qualified. But this political vision has been criticized, both in Plato's own time and throughout history. The most obvious criticism is, who decides who the philosophers are? Who determines who has achieved true knowledge of the forms? What prevents the philosopher kings from becoming tyrants, from using their supposed superior knowledge as a justification for absolute power? Plato's answer involves a complex system of education and testing, described at length in The Republic. The future philosopher kings are identified in childhood and educated carefully over many years. They are tested at each stage. Those who prove unsuitable are assigned to other roles in the city. Only a few reach the highest level of philosophical education and are then compelled to rule. But critics point out that this system could easily become corrupt. Who educates the educators? Who tests the testers? Who ensures that the philosopher kings truly have knowledge rather than just clever sophistry? And what happens to freedom, to diversity of opinion, to the ability of ordinary people to shape their own lives in a city ruled by an elite class of philosopher kings? These are serious questions, and they have led many readers to reject Plato's political program, while still appreciating the allegory of the cave as an epistemological teaching. It is possible to accept Plato's point about the difficulty of knowledge, about the way most people live in a world of appearances rather than reality, without accepting his conclusion that philosophers should have absolute political power. Indeed, the history of the 20th century gave us vivid examples of what happens when a small elite claims to possess the truth and demands absolute power to reshape society according to their vision. The communist states, claiming to be guided by scientific knowledge of historical laws, became totalitarian nightmares. Theocracies, claiming to be guided by divine truth, have often been oppressive and intolerant. So perhaps the lesson of the allegory of the cave is not that we should establish rule by philosopher kings. Perhaps the lesson is humbler and more personal. It is that we should question our own assumptions. We should recognize that our understanding is limited. We should be open to the possibility that what we believe to be reality is only appearance, only shadow, only a limited and distorted view of something truer and more complex. And when we encounter someone who claims to see things more clearly than we do, someone who challenges our cherished beliefs, someone who suggests that our worldview is fundamentally wrong, we should not automatically reject them. We should listen. We should consider the possibility that they might be right. We should be willing to undertake our own difficult journey toward truth, even if it means leaving behind comfortable certainties. At the same time, we should be skeptical of anyone who claims to have absolute knowledge, who demands that we follow them unquestioningly, who insists that they have seen the truth and we must simply obey. True philosophical wisdom, as exemplified by Socrates, is characterized by humility as much as by knowledge. Socrates claimed to know, only that he knew nothing. He questioned others not to dominate them, but to help them examine their own beliefs. So, the allegory teaches us to be both humble and questioning. Humble, because we should recognize that our own understanding is probably limited, probably based on shadows rather than reality. Questioning, because we should not simply accept any claim to superior knowledge without examination. Let us also consider the psychological and existential dimensions of the allegory. Beyond its epistemological and political meanings, the allegory speaks to something deeply human, the experience of growth, change, and transformation. We all begin life in a kind of cave. As children, we accept the reality presented to us by our parents, our culture, our immediate environment. We believe what we are taught. We do not question the assumptions of our society. We are, in effect, prisoners who have never known anything other than the shadows. Then, as we grow and learn, we begin to encounter new ideas, new experiences, new perspectives. We travel to new places. We meet people who think differently. We read books that challenge our assumptions. We have experiences that do not fit our existing understanding. This is the beginning of liberation, the first turning around to glimpse the fire behind us, the first awareness that our previous understanding was incomplete. And this beginning of liberation is often painful and disorienting. It can be frightening to realize that what you believed to be true might not be true. It can be difficult to question beliefs that are deeply held, that are shared by people you love and respect, that form the foundation of your identity. It is tempting to turn back, to retreat into familiar certainties, to reject the new and unsettling ideas. But if we persist, if we continue the difficult journey of questioning and learning, we can gradually expand our understanding. We can move from the cave world of unexamined assumptions into a richer, more complex, more accurate understanding of reality. We can grow, mature, become wiser, and then we face the challenge of the return. How do we relate to people who are still in the cave of unexamined belief? How do we communicate with family members or old friends who have not undergone the same transformative experiences we have? How do we live in a society whose values and assumptions we no longer fully share? This is a challenge that many people face, particularly in our modern, diverse, rapidly changing world. A young person from a traditional community who goes to university and encounters new ideas. An immigrant who moves between cultures and learns to see both from the outside. A person who has had a profound spiritual or psychological experience that others cannot relate to. In all these cases, the individual faces the dilemma of the returned prisoner. How to bridge the gap between where they have been and where others remain. The allegory offers no easy answers, but it does offer validation. It tells us that this difficulty is real, that it is part of the process of growth and enlightenment, that we should not expect it to be easy. It tells us that we may face misunderstanding, resistance, even hostility when we try to share what we have learned. But it also tells us that we should try anyway, because it is right, because some may listen, because the effort is worthwhile, even when the outcome is uncertain. There is also a spiritual dimension to the allegory, one that has resonated with religious thinkers throughout history. Early Christian theologians saw parallels between Plato's cave and the human condition as described in Christian theology. Humanity, they said, is trapped in a world of sin and illusion, unable to see divine truth. Christ is the liberator who frees us from our chains and leads us toward the light of God. The journey out of the cave is the journey of salvation. This Christian interpretation takes some liberties with Plato's meaning. Plato was not a Christian, and his forms are not the same as the Christian God, but the resonance is understandable. Both visions describe human beings as trapped in ignorance and illusion. Both describe a difficult journey toward truth and enlightenment. Both describe the transformation that occurs when one finally sees reality clearly. Similar parallels can be found in other religious and philosophical traditions. Buddhism speaks of beings trapped in samsara, the cycle of suffering caused by ignorance and attachment. Enlightenment in Buddhism is often described as seeing things as they truly are, free from the illusions created by our desires and misconceptions. The journey from ignorance to enlightenment in Buddhism shares many features with the journey from the cave to the sunlight in Plato's Allegory. Hindu philosophy speaks of Maya, the veil of illusion that prevents us from perceiving the ultimate reality of Brahman. The spiritual path in Hinduism involves piercing this veil, seeing beyond appearances, realizing the true nature of the self and its unity with the divine. Again, we see the pattern of being trapped in illusion and undertaking a difficult journey toward truth. What these parallels suggest is that the allegory of the cave touches on something universal in human experience. Across cultures and centuries, human beings have had the intuition that the world as it appears is not the world as it truly is, that we are in some sense trapped or limited in our understanding, and that there is a path to greater wisdom and clarity if we are willing to undertake it. Now, in our contemporary world, how does the allegory of the cave remain relevant? We live in a time of information abundance. We have access to more knowledge than any previous generation. We can search for any fact, read any book, watch lectures by the world's leading experts, all from devices in our pockets. And yet, it could be argued that we are still in a cave. Perhaps our cave is made of different materials than Plato's. Perhaps instead of shadows on a wall, we watch flickering images on screens. Perhaps instead of being chained in one physical location, we are chained by algorithms that show us only information that confirms what we already believe. Perhaps instead of a fire behind us, there are powerful corporations and institutions that shape what we see and hear, curating our reality in ways we do not fully understand. In this modern cave, we might believe we are well informed because we consume so much content. But are we seeing reality, or are we seeing shadows? Are we engaging with the complexity of the world, or are we living in filter bubbles that reinforce our existing opinions? Are we truly thinking for ourselves, or are we absorbing the thoughts and assumptions of those who control our information environment? These are uncomfortable questions. They suggest that even with all our technology and education, we might still be prisoners. The chains might be different, but they are still chains. The shadows might be more sophisticated, but they are still shadows. The fire might be replaced by server farms and satellite networks, but it still shapes what we see without us fully realizing it. If this is true, then the allegory of the cave is more relevant than ever. It reminds us to question what we think we know. It reminds us to look beyond the immediate, the obvious, the comfortable. It reminds us that true understanding requires effort, discomfort, and transformation. It reminds us to be willing to have our assumptions challenged, to entertain the possibility that we might be wrong, to undertake the difficult journey toward clearer seeing. And it reminds those who do have clearer understanding, whether through education, experience, or insight, to try to help others, to return to the cave, metaphorically speaking, to engage with people who have not yet seen what they have seen, to try to communicate truth in ways that others can understand, to accept that this will be difficult, frustrating, often unsuccessful, but still worthwhile. So what in the end is the deepest meaning of the allegory of the cave? Perhaps it is this: reality is richer, deeper, and more complex than it appears. Most of us, most of the time, see only a limited and distorted version of reality. Coming to see more clearly is possible, but it requires courage, effort, and willingness to endure discomfort. And once we have seen more clearly, we have an obligation to help others see, even though they may resist, even though they may reject our help, even though we may never know whether we have truly made a difference. This is a challenging vision. It does not promise easy enlightenment. It does not suggest that truth is readily accessible to anyone who wants it. It acknowledges the difficulty of knowledge, the resistance to change, the isolation of those who have grown beyond their origins. But it is also, in its way, a hopeful vision, because it tells us that growth is possible, that we are not forever trapped in ignorance, that through education, through questioning, through persistent effort, we can move from shadow to substance, from opinion to knowledge, from darkness to light. And it tells us that this journey matters, that it is worth undertaking despite its difficulties, that knowledge is valuable, not just for its own sake, but because it enables us to live better, to act more justly, to understand more truly. More than 2,000 years after Plato imagined a group of prisoners watching shadows on a cave wall, we are still reflecting on this image. We are still finding meaning in it. We are still using it to illuminate our own situation, our own struggles, our own journey toward understanding. The allegory endures because it captures something essential about the human condition. We are creatures capable of knowledge, but we do not automatically possess it. We are capable of growth, but growth requires challenge and change. We are capable of seeing reality clearly, but most often we see only appearances. We are capable of freeing ourselves and others, but freedom is not easily achieved or maintained, and so the cave remains, in our minds and in our world. The shadows still dance on the wall. The prisoners still sit, watching, believing they see reality. The chains still bind, the fire still flickers, thinking aloud. But the path upward is still there too. The possibility of liberation remains. The world above, the world of clearer seeing and truer understanding,
awaits those who are willing to make the difficult journey. And the philosopher, the freed prisoner, the one who has seen the light, stands at the boundary between the two worlds, knowing both the darkness and the light, bearing the burden of knowledge, accepting the duty to return, to try once more to lead others toward truth. This is Plato's legacy to us. Not a simple answer, but a profound question. Not a comfortable certainty, but a challenging invitation. Not a complete philosophy, but a starting point for our own thinking, our own questioning, our own journey from shadow to light. And with that invitation gently offered, with that question carefully placed before us, with that image of cave and sunlight held softly in mind, we can rest, we can reflect, we can wonder about our own caves, our own chains, our own shadows. We can consider what it might mean to be freed, to climb upward, to see more clearly. These are questions for another time, questions that will still be there when we wake. For now, the allegory has been told, the journey has been traced, the meanings have been explored, and it is time to rest. End of lecture. Total word count, approximately 15,000 words.